Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this special online meeting for Maintained Nursery Schools campaign. This is a joint meeting supported by several organisations, by the APPG for Nursery Schools, Early Education, Unison, National Education Union, National Association of Head Teachers, and also the National Governance Association. My name's Laura Flynn. I'm going to be your facilitator for this evening. I'm a regional organiser for NAHT, and my role is going to be to host the meeting and to ensure you get the most out of it. But we are delighted to welcome a fantastic panel here with us tonight. We have Jack Dromey MP, who is the Secretary of the APPG for Nursery Schools. We have Beatrice Merrick. Beatrice is the CEO of Early Education, charity that supports early years education. We're joined by Paul Whiteman, who is General Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers. Mary Bousted, she's Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union. And we're also very pleased to invite onto our panel some of our members and people who are part of our Maintained Nursery School community. We have Shameen Ashraf. She is a head teacher of a nursery school in Burnley and an NAHT member. We're delighted to be joined by Annika Williamson, who is a Unison member and is a support staff worker in a nursery. We also have with us Michaela Loebner. Michaela's a teacher and an NEU member in Lewisham in London. And a particular thank you to Kate Bateman, who is our parent at a nursery school in Birmingham. And we're very pleased for you to join us here tonight. So I'll just run through how it's going to work tonight. We encourage you to use Twitter. Please use the hashtag #SaveOurNurseries. We've also got the chat room, which you will have found already. So please do talk to each other, say hello, engage with each other through the chat room. We've also got colleagues from the trades unions in there who will help you with any technical issues, but also will signpost you to various links throughout the evening that would be appropriate for you. We also have a question and answer session, and we're going to begin the meeting with Jack Dromey and Beatrice Merrick and Mary Bousted. So if you do have any questions for those three, we invite you to pose them via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please do not put questions in the chat box, as they won't be seen there. So we will hear from, first of all, from Jack Dromey, then from Beatrice Merrick and from Mary Bousted, have questions to them, and then we'll move to the Minister, Vicky Ford, who will be joining us around 5:30. She will be making an address to the meeting, and she will also be taking some questions that have been submitted. And we will be hearing from Paul Whiteman, General Secretary of National Association of Head Teachers, and then moving on to some voices from our Maintained Nursery Schools, from Shameen, from Annika, from Kate and from Michaela. And then we'll be finishing the meeting possibly slightly after 6 o'clock, now that we're very pleased to welcome the Minister to join us, but we hope to be finished by about 6:10. So I think that's all from me at the moment. Please do engage with us on Twitter with the hashtag #SaveOurNurseries. And we're delighted we've got 800 people here with us tonight, which is a fantastic achievement, and you're all very welcome to join us. But first of all, I'm going to invite Jack Dromey MP, who is a Secretary for the APPG for Nursery Schools, to address the meeting. Thank you very much for joining us, Jack.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on your initiative. As you said, I'm the Secretary of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Nursery Schools and the Member of Parliament for Birmingham Erdington. And my involvement with nursery schools started in Erdington and Birmingham. We've got 27 Birmingham-wide, 4 in Erdington. The Castle Vale School, the Osborne School, the Featherstone School, and the Marsh Hill School. And I ought to add this about Erdington. It's rich in talent, but it's one of the poorest constituencies in the country. If ever children needed the best possible start in life, it is in a constituency like Erdington. All children are entitled to that. I've seen firsthand how remarkable the impact of nursery schools have been. Lives transformed of children. Struggling parents often helped. I remember one said to me, "Jack, the nursery school helped me get off my knees. I would cry every night. I didn't know what to do. they told me how to be a good mum. I've seen also other circumstances of tears replaced by smiles when parents and grandparents have seen their kids get on and they're proud, they want the best for their kids. One granddad who said to me, Jack, he used to never say, string two words together before he went to the nursery school. Now he said, we can't keep him quiet. He talks endlessly. He's so good, he's so confident. He has been transformed by the nursery schools. So what you do, all of you, really matters. We've got nearly 400 nationwide. Let me just say this, first of all, if there's one thing you are not, it's babysitters. You are schools. And the reason I say that is that sometimes people make that mistake, and that's the wrong mistake to make. You are schools. You are the jewel in the crown of early years provision. It's not just what you do directly, it's also what you do more generally in terms of early years, raising standards, for example, in the PDIs, and in particular, the outstanding work that nursery schools do with kids with special needs. Now, unfortunately, we have mounting problems. We've had problems for years, as I'll say in just one moment. It's about what we do about it at the next stages. Before COVID, we already had big problems in the sector. Supplementary funding has been cut in real terms by 14%. Nearly 1 in 5 nursery schools are now in deficit, up from 3%. Also, you've been denied the access to COVID funding that other schools have received, and you've been unable to access rates relief. Yet, the nursery schools have performed outstanding work in the most difficult of circumstances. Talking with Sally Lees today, who's the chair of early years in Birmingham, the 27 schools, but also the head teacher at the Castle Vale School. She told me about how twice as many nursery schools have stayed open as PVIs, but how in Castle Vale, as PVIs were closing, the nursery school was taking them in. So in the most difficult of circumstances, the nursery schools have been absolutely outstanding. There's one other problem I want to refer to, is sadly, there are some local authorities now reviewing their commitment to nursery schools. Now, I understand the pressures that local authorities are under, but if ever there is a false economy, then closing nursery schools or withdrawing support from nursery schools is the very last thing that you should do. Now, on a more positive note, we have been here before in terms of problems with nursery school funding. And many of you will be veterans of the campaign starting back 4 and 5 years ago. And forgive me if I say this, it was born in Erdington. What happened was when there was the huge financial crises that was looming back, best part pushing 5 years ago now, is we started a campaign in Erdington. What we did was to mobilize thousands locally, including many, many parents. We then rolled it out Birmingham-wide. A summit of the 27 nursery schools convened together with the local authority. We then rolled it out nationwide, the largest all-party parliamentary group initial meeting in the history of the House of Commons. 600 people were at it, 600. And it was so big, we had to move it from the House of Commons to Central Hall, Westminster, to accommodate all those who were there. And we fought a tremendous campaign and we won. We've won 3 battles in relation to continuation of funding. We won. Why did we win? Because what you had was a combination on the one hand of head teachers giving leadership, working together with other unions, of course, but giving leadership, mobilizing on the other hand, parent power. And then what happened was all over the country, we saw parents and of course teachers and head teachers, but parents in particular, putting pressure on members of parliament. And the best way of describing it is by the time we had the second meeting of the all-party parliamentary group, we had about 20 Tory colleagues who turned up. There's only 3 of them there to start with. We had about 20 Tory colleagues who turned up, including one guy, by the way, he's, I mean, we may be of different political traditions, but he's a decent guy. And he said, I had no idea that this was happening until 10 parents arrived at my surgery and said, what the hell are you doing? When are you going to stand up for us, the nursery schools? Now, the reason I tell that story is that even in bleak times, you can make a difference. But to make a difference, we have to both make out the argument about why nursery schools matter. That's for absolute certain. But what we've then got to do is to be organised systematically, that all MPs, not just Tories, all MPs be put on the spot around, most immediately, it's sometimes been called a transformation and recovery fund, whichever way one wants to describe it, and you'll hear more about that later on. Most immediately that, but then crucially, an end to the stopgap funding of nursery schools. And part of our problem has been we may have won 3 battles in recent years to roll over support, but it can't go on like this. You've got to plan for the future as nursery schools. You've got to be able to plan for the future with confidence, and that means secure long-term funding. So if I can just say 2 things in conclusion, I'd like to pay tribute to all of you for the work that you do. Having seen it, I just personally find it so moving. Having seen it firsthand, it's nothing short of magnificent. Like also to pay tribute to those who've been instrumental in the campaign of the NAHT, NEU, all working together, early years, the work that Beatrice has done, nothing short of outstanding. I live in the real world. These are the bleakest of bleak times. But I'll tell you one thing, we're not actually talking about a huge sum of money to give the nursery schools the secure long-term funding they deserve. So I think from tonight and this very well timed discussion, because all sorts of decisions are going to be made over the weeks and months to come, that what we say with one voice is our nursery schools are the jewel in the crown of early years provision. We will do everything. We will move mountains to secure their long-term funding and therefore the security for the future they need to continue to do the outstanding work that you all do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Jack, and thank you for joining us this evening. It is very much appreciated, and for all the work that you and the other officers of the APPG have done in supporting Maintained Nursery Schools. Thank you very much for that as well. We're going to move on to Beatrice Merrick now. Beatrice is the CEO of Early Education, and I'd like to invite you to take the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you to Jack. And I'd like to say a big thank you to all the officers and the MPs who regularly attend the APPG. And I think we're very lucky that the new minister, Vicky Ford, was a regular attender at the APPG. So we hope that she's coming with a good understanding of this, as was another of her colleagues who's now Minister at DFE, Gillian Keegan. So we hope we've got some friends in the right places at the moment. It's wonderful to see everybody popping up in the chat. It would be lovely to see you all face to face. We're very much missing you. We are, as Jack said, in a very frustrating place, that we know that so many of you had been hanging on, waiting for the promised changes to funding from DFE, and 4 years on, we're still not there. We completely understand that COVID was not something anybody was expecting, and I genuinely think the DFE were poised to look at the funding formula before all that hit, and they have just been knocked for 6 and working on dealing with the emergency. But it doesn't help you at the sharp end. We have a sector that as a whole, COVID-19 has really showed how having a sector that is funded on a shoestring doesn't help anybody. The sector is so fragile at the moment, and your funding, you will know better than us. We knew that up to 60% of you were expecting to be in deficit by the end of 2019-20. Now, I don't know whether that's where we got to, but that was the expectation when we last looked at those figures. And now, with the loss of parental income and other sources of funding that you might have had above and beyond the early education entitlement funding, the fact that the supplementary funding had been cash limited, and of course there are some of you who get very little, if any, supplementary funding, it all brings us to a perfect storm where the security of nursery schools is really on a knife edge now. And we know that, as has been said, during the crisis, twice as many of you were staying open. The figures from DFE suggests that 70% of state-funded nurseries, now it's not clear whether that means maintained nursery schools or something broader, but 70% of state-funded nurseries were staying open during COVID-19 compared to 35% of other early years providers. Now that all of early years is supposed to have opened up, we're seeing 94% of state nurseries open with 35% attendance compared to 58% of the early years sector as a whole, where the attendance is more like 20%. So all of these things tell us how important maintained nursery schools are in providing that vital public service that we should make sure that government and the public really understand that the early years is, and the ability to keep going to support the most vulnerable families. Again, we've been having reports from all over about the way that you have been worrying and supporting worrying about and supporting the most vulnerable families in your communities. We know that you have been not just delivering home learning, not just making sure that you're keeping in touch with vulnerable children who aren't coming into the settings, but that you have been doing food bank runs and all kinds to actually deal with the basics. So we cannot do without the maintained nursery sector. We need it to expand. We need this to be the core of the whole system that keeps everything else on the rails. But at the moment, we have a funding system that is going to see more and more nursery schools close across the country. Everybody has kind of gone quiet at the moment about what happens with the sorry, my phone is going. I want to turn it off before, I know you can't hear it, but this whole crisis has just showed us what we need in the way of a public service at the core of the early years to deliver the services that we need. So I won't say more than that now, but very happy to take questions, and I'll pass back to Laura.
Thank you very much for that, Beatrice. And we've got a packed agenda tonight, so I'm very quickly going to invite Mary to take the floor to speak about the campaign going forward. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, everyone, and good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. So today, Early Education, the National Education Union and the NAHT wrote to the Prime Minister, and we made the argument which both Jack and Beatrice have made about the importance of maintained nursery schools. So all that's reflected at the start of the letter, and then we did 3 specific asks of the Prime Minister. So I'm going to read out the asks that we made. The first one is, as soon as the government is in a position to review the long-term funding formula for maintained nursery schools, they must be recognised as schools to adequately cover their statutory responsibilities and staff obligations and costs, and must be entitled to receive funding equivalent to that received by a primary school with a nursery class. So this must include a lump sum, premises factors, rates, PFI and split sites, additional needs funding based on deprivation, EL and mobility, early years pupil premium, and any other relevant categories now and in the future. So those received by schools, they must be received by maintained nursery schools. In addition, children attending maintained nursery schools should be funded on an enhanced hourly rate under the early years national funding formula. The hourly rate for maintained nursery schools needs to reflect the additional costs of having to employ a more highly qualified staff team, including qualified teachers. Hourly rate should be the same for the universal 15 hours and the additional 30 hours entitlement. Both these and the hourly rates for the 2-year-old offer should reflect actual costs for the staffing maintained nursery schools are required to provide. So that's the first one about funding, and the funding should receive all the additional funding which primary schools receive as well. The second one is, in the meantime, government must reassure local authorities that the supplementary funding will be continued in 2021 to 2022, uprated for inflation. There's also a need for an emergency fund to ensure those nursery schools which have received little or no funding since 2017 are not forced into deficit by the government's slowness in tackling the funding inconsistencies. And the third ask in the letter is that maintained nursery schools which face the threat of closure within a very short time frame, they are in a crisis which must be addressed urgently. The impact of COVID-19 has highlighted that the education system would struggle without maintained nursery schools. Provision would be poorer and less responsive. And I here take up Jack's point in particular, that maintained nursery schools are disproportionately in the poorest areas of society and do the biggest job in the poorest areas, becoming beacons of excellence in early years provision. So if maintained nursery schools close, the cost of looking after children in great need will fall on other services at a time when they are already under severe pressure. So we have concluded those three asks in the letter. We've asked the government to show its support for maintained nursery schools by immediately confirming supplementary funding for 2021 to 22, and crucially, the summer term of 2021, and ensure this funding is increased in line with inflation and bring back the value to real terms value in 2016 and 17. We've asked the government to provide additional resources and support with COVID-19 costs, and we've asked them to commit to reviewing the early years funding formula as soon as possible and by 2021 at the latest. That letter is available on the NEU website. I'm sure it'll be available through the NAHT and through early education. We ask you to get hold of this letter and to send a copy to your local authority and to send a copy to your local MP so that they know what the asks are, they know how vital early years funding is, and they know how vital maintained nursery school funding is. So keep this vital part of the early years sector open. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mary. Very much appreciated in your contribution. I believe the link has been posted in the chat for NAHT, and we'll hopefully get the NEU letter link for you as well. So we're already behind schedule, which is probably not surprising, but I'm just going to pose a couple of quick questions to Jack, Mary and to Beatrice. If you could keep your answers short, that would be appreciated. The first question is going to be for Jack. It's from Donna Harwood Duffy. How are we going to get it known that we are schools, even if colleagues in our own local authorities and the rest of the early years sectors do not understand how we differ? How are we going to get this known? And also through Parliament. Jack, if you're okay to answer that, please.
The reason I made the point earlier, can you?
No, not now.
Not now, Jack. You've muted yourself again.
Unmute.
There you go, Jack. Perfect. So how can it get to be known wider that nursery schools are schools?
We need to tell the story, because the reason I made the point earlier that your schools, you're not babysitters, is because sometimes some people confuse what you do with PVIs or other forms of babysitting provision, in inverted commas. I think what that means, therefore, is that, first of all, in no particular order, on a continuing basis, celebrate who you are and what you do in your local community, using local media, using social media. This is where I think the campaign at the next stages can help. And if I was you, I would hold out the fact that the nursery schools have remained open, doing an outstanding job in the most difficult of circumstances, including as PVIs have been closing at a very fast rate, that you've kept going, taking in children who otherwise would have been, to be frank, left in the lurch. There's a story there for you to tell, therefore, about how through a moment of terrible national crisis, you rose to the challenge. And I think it would be helpful if arising out of this meeting, maybe a bit of a framework of that kind to enable you then within your communities to tell that story. I think then just secondly, following on from that, it's the role that you play in both locally, but also at national level. I sometimes talk in Erdington about Joe and Josephine Soap in The Dog and Duck, their outlook on life. how many of them actually know about the work of nursery schools? Many do, many do. But there is a job to be done to publicise within your local communities more generally who you are and what you do. And just one final thing, then crucially, coming back to the people who ultimately make the decision, it's members of parliament. I won't name the particular MP because it would not be appropriate, but I remember him saying to me, this was now in relation to the early stages of what was a successful campaign that I referred to earlier on. He said, Jack, I'd never heard of nursery schools until I got asked to go to one in my constituency. He was a relatively new MP, and meet with the parents. So publicise who you are more generally, your role at a moment of terrible national crisis, and make sure that every member of parliament receives parents going to see him or her, asking them to back their nursery schools locally.
Thank you very much for that, Jack. It's very much appreciated. We're delighted to be joined by the Minister now. We're running a couple of moments behind schedule, so I'll just go quickly to Beatrice, and if you could give quite a brief answer to this. It's from Sheila Rye. Could the panel please outline the steps that have been taken to ensure that Maintained Nursery Schools survive, the survival of Maintained Nursery Schools? Beatrice, are you okay to just answer that, please? Thank you.
I guess the question is by whom? I mean, we as a campaign, we have, as I think everybody here probably knows, we have been making the case for the last 4 or 5 years, maybe it's more now, to say to government, we need a solution to this. Government recognised that when they introduced the early years national funding formula, that Maintained Nursery Schools did not fit and needed a different solution, a different funding solution. And they put in place the supplementary funding as a stopgap. The problem is that it kept falling down the agenda, and so 4 years on, here we are still waiting for that solution. I think we've put forward all kinds of arguments, whether that's being part of the schools block or being funded within the early years block, but on a different basis, recognising that Maintained Nursery Schools are schools. We put proposals out there. We know that DFE are doing the work. And then at local level, obviously, there's been a lot of lobbying councils to try and make sure they understand the importance of nursery schools, that they're working with their nursery schools so that there is best use of resources. And the campaigning that everybody is doing has been absolutely vital to keeping that high on the agenda, and we just have to keep going with that campaigning until we get to that workable funding solution.
Thank you very much for that, Beatrice. And I'll just put the final question for now to Mary. I'm asking this because it's the most popular one. I think you can give quite a short answer to it, Mary. So here we go. It's from Debbie Hayes. Could you please support our plea to receive funding for the associated costs linked to coronavirus grants that Maintained Nursery Schools are currently not eligible for?
Yes, we can, and that's in the letter.
Great, thank you very much for that, Mary. Appreciate that was a short answer for you now. So we are delighted to move on. We are now joined by the Minister for Children and Families, Vicky Ford MP. We are very grateful to her for giving her time this evening, we've got a short amount of time with her, so she's going to begin with a brief address to you all, and then we're going to be asking some questions of her. But as I said, we are delighted that she has taken the time to join us tonight, and I know that you will all be very grateful of her for giving her time to come and speak to you directly. So I'll invite the Minister to come forward now. Thank you very much. Could you possibly press unmute, please? I'm struggling to do it for you. Minister, is it possible to press the unmute button?
Oh,
there we go.
Every time I'm trying to press the unmute button, somebody's pressing it back again. So I do apologise. Thank you very much for inviting me this evening. I apologise also, I'm currently in the House of Commons where we know a vote is going to be called at any time. So hopefully it won't happen till 6 o'clock, but just bear with me if you hear a loud bell ringing and suddenly see me running away. It's not that I don't love the maintained nursery school sector. I do love the maintained nursery school sector. And I know that there's about 600 people on this call, which shows the strength of feeling about maintained nursery schools. I have 2 maintained nursery schools in my constituency. I know in particular Tanglewood very well. They are an amazing organisation. It's a great privilege to have them in my constituency, to see what they do with children and families. And also the work that they and many of the maintained nursery schools do to work with other early years providers in the area to share their expertise and to help improve the quality of the whole early years sector, and often in quite specialist areas. So, for example, helping children with SEND, children from more challenging backgrounds and more disadvantaged backgrounds. And so I'd really like to give a big thank you to all of you in the sector for all you do, not only in your own setting, but also what you do for the wider community. I'd also really like to thank you for what you've done over the past few months, especially caring for vulnerable children and caring for young children. You've been absolutely key to the response at the peak and at the most challenging time of this virus. It's been a difficult time for everyone, but you and the other provided education, provided childcare have been absolutely vital in getting us through the past few months. I know that you're now looking to the future and want to know what lies ahead for maintained nursery schools. And I do have to apologise. You know, I have been very busy working on COVID and COVID responses. I think you will understand that. But we do also need to focus on the future. I apologise, I'd love to have met you earlier. But just because we haven't met doesn't mean that the future funding of Maintained Nursery Schools has dropped off my radar. It definitely hasn't. It's been high up my list of priorities from day one in the job. And now that we're starting to come out of the most acute phase of the crisis, it's one that we're building more work into. I know there'll be 2 main issues on mind. Firstly, the funding for the summer term in 2021 as part of the academic year that's going to be beginning in September. I know that local authorities want assurance that they can allocate places with confidence. And so on that point, I want to absolutely reassure you that our commitment to the long-term funding of maintained nursery schools remains, as does our commitment to have appropriate funding protections in place alongside our funding reforms. And officials were already having conversations with Treasury about this when the coronavirus outbreak hit. I've been very clear that I expect those conversations to pick up and ramp up, especially as we're moving into spending review. There is no one who wants or expects a cliff edge in the supplementary funding. But the second issue that I suspect is on your minds is about funding beyond that. Quite reasonably, you want us to reach a solution that recognises the important role of maintained nursery schools and gives a stable and sustainable funding for the long term. You don't want to have to go through this issue every year, and neither do I or my colleagues. We want to find a long-term solution, and the supplementary funding arrangement was never intended to be the long-term solution. And I know that my officials who are listening in on this call, they want to find a long-term solution as well. So we all want to get there. Just a few areas that the solution must cover and not in any particular order, but solution must cover the following areas. First of all, it must preserve services for the most vulnerable. And I think I mentioned Children in Need and SEND at the very beginning. It must be transparent and easily understandable. I heard your comment earlier that the supplementary funding has not been anything like that. We need it to be transparent and easily understandable. It must be sustainable to give you certainty and allow local authorities to plan. But it also needs to be fair. It needs to be fair between maintained nursery schools in different local authorities and between maintained nursery schools and other providers in the same local authority, because I know that not every area has maintained nursery schools, and I know that other providers need that sort of sense of fairness between the funding that they see and the funding that you see. And therefore, in order to get that sense of fairness, we do need to be very clear about the value for money, what you're offering, and what you offer in terms of your wider role as support to the early years sector, as well as what you offer in your own settings. And then another part of the solution needs to try and achieve is to avoid any volatility in funding or volatility across the sector. And all of those different issues will need to be balanced against each other. And then another challenge will be that we'll need to set the solution in terms of the wider context of what's happening in early years as a whole and across government. So I would very much like to hear some of your thoughts about some of those principles that I've just mentioned. In terms of timing of this, the Chancellor hasn't yet announced the formal timing of the spending review, but we know the spending review is coming and this will be an opportunity to resolve this. I'm happy to continue working with you as we prepare for that. And that's why it's useful to hear what you're seeing on the front line, as it were, and hear about your thoughts from the future. When the voting bell does go, I think that Neil, who's on the call, will still be listening in, so we'll be able to pick up any of the comments that you make.
Thank you very much, Minister. Are you okay to take a few questions? And if you do need to go, we understand that you need to go.
That's fine. Let me see how I do.
Okay, thank you very much. And once again, we do appreciate you being here with us tonight and for the words and the opportunity you've taken to address members directly. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. The first question I'm going to ask is from Sue Allen. Will nursery schools be eligible for additional funding if, from September, the safety requirements we need to implement, e.g. creating bubbles of children, if they increase the cost to our nursery schools? Will we get additional funding?
So why don't we wait until you see the guidance for September, which you will be seeing very soon. Okay. I think in terms of the early years sector as a whole, and I know it's very challenging sometimes, the differences between what early years get and what the schools get. But in terms of most early years providers are obviously privately run organisations, and compared to any other sectors in government or in the economy, the government has put a big investment into the sector by continuing to pay the 3.6 billion in early years entitlements into local authorities, even if the settings have been closed or children haven't been attending. So that was a big announcement right at the beginning of COVID of the government wanting to keep this sector of privately run businesses still going, even though they may not be open to all the children. and then what we've worked through is trying to endeavour to make sure that you could get the best possible support from every other government scheme that's out there. So that's why we had to work through that very complex issue of how could you also use the furlough scheme and the job potential scheme, and we're going to continue to working to do that. But as comes September, I'm hoping that we will see the new guidance very soon, and I'm hoping that as we've said very clearly, we want to see all schools back to as normal as possible come September, and you will be seeing that guidance very soon.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. The next question we've got is from Sally Lease. Will the Minister use the sterling work of Maintained Nursery Schools have done for children and families, wider than their own cohort and mostly at a cost to themselves, as they were not able to access government financial support that was available to schools or to PBIs, to finally provide appropriate and perpetual funding for Maintained Nursery Schools?
So absolutely, we recognise that Maintained Nursery Schools have done a huge amount of work supporting wider economy. They have received the entitlement funding. They have been able to use the furlough scheme for areas that are not covered by the entitlement income. But one of the reasons why Maintained Nursery Schools also receive this higher level of funding than other early years providers is in recognition of the fact that they often do support a wider level of the early years environment.
Thank you, Minister. Hopefully you'll get time to answer this one. It's somewhat of a technical question, but I think it's an important one. It's from Julie Plumstead. She asks, what is the criteria used to decide on each Maintained Nursery Schools lump sum from central government? This has been in place for many years and there seems to be no transparency to the very different amounts that Maintained Nursery Schools receive.
Could you just repeat that? Sorry, you're dropping in and out on the rather dodgy Wi-Fi in the House of Commons.
What is the criteria used to decide on each Maintained Nursery Schools lump sum from central government? This has been in place for many years and there seems to be no transparency about the very different amounts that Maintained Nursery Schools receive.
So in terms of the amounts that they receive, they were set back historically based on levels that you had in the past. So I agree that there needs to be transparency going forward and that this is why we need to find a long-term solution that is not based on how the previous top-up supplementary grants have worked.
Okay, like I said, I think that is quite a detailed question, but I think it's
we match the amount that the councils were funding back in the historical dates when the supplementary grant first came out.
Okay, thank you.
Emily's on the line. Emily, do you want to answer that? Can we get her on? Emily Archer.
Is she as an attendee?
Yeah.
I will look. Emily Arch, is that who it would be?
Yes.
Emily Arch. So is Emily one of your advisors? Is that
one of these? Emily is the expert on how that funding has been set in the past.
Okay, thank you very much. So hopefully Emily will be able to join us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello.
Emily.
Hi. So I head up the early years funding team in DFE. So the technical answer here is that when we introduced the early years national funding formula, then what we recognised at the time was that we needed to make an arrangement for Maintained Nursery Schools. And so what we did was looked at the amount that each local authority was spending on its Maintained Nursery Schools in 2016-17. That was the baseline year. And what we said was that what we will do is effectively pay a top-up on top of the early years national funding formula hourly rate that we pay to local authorities, in order to pay each local authority at the level that the local authority was choosing to spend money on maintained nursery schools in that 2016-17 baseline year. And so what it is doing is bringing the funding back up to the level that local authorities were choosing to spend. Now, what that does mean is that that means it looks different across a lot of different local authorities, and that's simply because different authorities were choosing to spend different amounts on maintained nursery schools at that point in time. And that's how the funding continues to be distributed, because it uses that baseline year.
Thank you very much for that, Emily, and thank you for joining in at an unexpected moment. And hopefully, Minister, we can have one more question for you before you have to go for the division. It's from Sarah Watson. Can you guarantee that Maintained Nursery Schools will receive funding for future years, and that this will increase, as it hasn't for many years now? We haven't been guaranteed funding further than 2021.
So we know that there's an immediate concern about the summer term in 2021. And as I said earlier, the officials were talking to Treasury about this just before the outbreak, and I want the formal talks to continue through 2021, but that we've been very clear that we want to continue to support the maintained nursery sector. The long-term solution, and we know we need a long-term solution, as I've said in my talk, we need to find, and we are committed to finding, a long-term funding solution for maintained nurseries, but it does need to be agreed as part of the spending review in the context of the overall settlement for early years. So we have said we are committed to finding a long-term funding solution, but it does need to be part of the spending review.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Minister. Because I appreciate you've got to go.
Yeah, are there any more there? Sorry.
There's a lot more questions which we'll pass on to you and your staff at the DFE, but we thank you very much for answering our questions.
Okay. And thank you very much. I'm sorry, I've been dropping in and out of the Wi-Fi here slightly, so hence the confusion.
If you are able to stay on just as long as you can, because we've got some of our
I'll stay on as long as I can. Yep. Okay.
Skills, which will be.
The bell goes. Cheerio. Bye.
I'm now going to invite Paul Whiteman, who's the General Secretary of NAHT, to just give a short response to the Minister. Thank you, Paul.
Is that working? Give us a nod.
Yes, it is.
Brilliant. And thank you, Minister, for joining us. I mean, I think that's the most physical demonstration of the support for the maintained nursery school sector that we could have joining us this evening. So thanks very much for that, and thank you for your contribution. I think it was really pleasing to hear your acknowledgement of the role that maintained nursery schools have played during the pandemic, and I'd add my thanks to all of our members and staff in maintained nursery schools for what they've done. And your reassuring words tonight about funding, and in your letter to us recently, reassuring us that a long-term resolution to the funding issues for maintained nursery schools is very welcome. And I can assure you that our colleagues in this sector have wonderful patience and wonderful persistence. When I became General Secretary about 3 years ago, one of my first appearances as General Secretary was to one of these APPGs, and I've been having a fairly full inbox on the subject ever since. So that kind of demonstrates the persistence and the patience with this issue. And you can absolutely understand it when the unique contribution from maintained nursery schools is agreed by everybody. Everybody that we speak to recognises the role that they play, recognises the role in looking after the most disadvantaged communities going forward, and yet we can't achieve a long-term solution. So your commitment to looking at that long-term solution again is most welcome, and we can't blame you. We've had the reassurances that all come from your predecessors, and things have got in the way, but we very much hope that as the champion in the seat right now, you'll be able to solve it with Treasury going forward. But just a couple of things on that to make sure that we can get there. In the short term, two things really. One, those reassurances about the immediate funding are very welcome, but we would invite you to step in where local authorities are making early decisions to close maintained nursery schools before the long-term funding is decided. We've had a few instances where that is taking place, and we see that as a premature decision. And then on the longer term issues, just one point that you made about whatever the funding outcome is, it has to be fair. That worries me slightly, in that fairness is a term that often hides some of the nuances and some of the unique contributions that Maintained Nursery Schools make. And it's not fair to compare them with other providers when the job that they do actually is very different to some of those providers in the PVI sector, for example. These are schools, and they need to be funded like schools, and recognising the fact that they are schools. So that was the only worry for me in terms of the reassurances that you gave us, but I'm sure you understand that, and you'll be taking that forward on behalf of the sector. But just to add my thanks for being with us and staying so long, and staying long enough for me to make those points. But thank you once again.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. And again, thank you to the Minister for joining us. We're now going to move on to hear from you, effectively, from staff and also parents from Maintained Nursery Schools. We are delighted that we've had people agree to join us tonight. And I know Paul and Mary are going to have to leave at some point soon as well, so we can say goodbye to you at the moment if we want. But I'm delighted the Minister's still here, because I think these are some of the most important voices going forward. So we're first of all going to be hearing from a head teacher. Her name is Shamim Ashraf. She is a head teacher of a Maintained Nursery School in Burnley, and is an NAHT member as well. So thank you very much, Shamim. Shamim, if you could unmute yourself, please. Sorry.
Sorry, is that better?
That's perfect, thank you.
Okay. In Lancashire, we're very proud that we have 24 Maintained Nursery Schools, all of them in areas of high deprivation, and we support the most vulnerable, like many Maintained Nursery Schools in the country. In spite of the uncertainty around the supplementary funding continuing beyond 2021, and the prospect of all of us losing over 45% of our funding, we have continued to provide education and improve the life chances of the most vulnerable children and their families in our society. Our schools are led by the most experienced specialist leaders in their field of early years. We are schools, and our unique selling point is that specialism and that leadership and the quality that we provide within a framework of a high accountability to ensure that our children and our families get the very best value for money. We understand how children learn, and we understand how to support their emotional resilience, and recognise the importance of nurture and well-being, and that personal, social, emotional development are the building blocks for lifelong learning. And never has that been more of the case than the COVID-19 response, because that has been our focus in Maintained Nursery Schools, to build that resilience and support the families ongoing since the crisis began. Our research-informed practice is highly effective in supporting our families, and fully supports the government aims around every child reaching their full potential and reducing the inequalities that continue to exist. It is with this expertise in early years that we're able to support those children who enter our nursery far below where they should be in terms of levels typical for their age, and the fact that most of those children leave our nursery schools in line with expectations is something that we should praise and support to be able to be continued further. This is what narrowing the gap is all about. It's about the knowledge that we have of our families. We support generation after generation. We know our families really, really well. We know them so well. We know how to support them. They turn to us time and time again for all sorts of things. The expertise we've built and the value for money we offer, we share with our primary schools following our Ofsted inspection, and many nursery schools are outstanding following our particular Ofsted inspection, where we were encouraged to disseminate our practice. We had over 160 visitors from primary schools. They were head teachers and many private, voluntary and independent settings who wished to look and share our practice with us. We offered training. Many of that training was a lot of value for money. Some of it was free. because in the end, it's children that matters, and it's children that are at the heart of everything that we do. So this is the role that is unique that we offer. In Lancashire, a decision has already been made by the local authority to commence consultation on the future of maintained nursery schools in financial difficulty. So we're in an urgent need for reassurance that not only will our funding continue beyond 2021, but that the way maintained nursery schools are funded needs to be looked at so that we are protected long term. It would be sad to lose any maintained nursery school because they are in areas that are the most deprived in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Shamim, and it's really valuable to hear from a serving school leader in a maintained nursery school. I'm now going to move to you, Kate, because I think it's quite important while we've still got the Minister here, if we can hear from a parent point of view about what your child going to a maintained nursery school has meant for you. Kate is a parent from a maintained nursery school in Birmingham. Thank you very much, Kate.
Hi everyone. My little girl Aria, she comes to.
I'm so sorry, guys. My bell is just ringing in the background. I'm going to have to leave you, but Emily is listening on the end there.
Thank you very much, Vicky.
Look after Aria.
There will be a replay available tomorrow, which we will send to the Minister as well. So I'll make sure she can see you, Kate. So I'll let you carry on, Kate. Thank you very much, and thank you to the Minister.
Thank you. Yeah, my little girl, she comes to Catabel Nursery. She has done since she was 2 years old now. She's 4, she's going to school in September. She used to go to a private nursery before she came here, and honestly, it was the best thing that I ever did moving her here. She's just come on so much in the past 2 years that she's been here, and it's down to coming to a school. Like, my child is now ready for school because she's came to a school, she's been taught by a teacher, by TAs, and it was the best thing that we've ever done, was moving her from a private nursery to a school. And listening on this call now, it's crazy that this is such the passion, and this is such like a secret fight that you don't hear about on the news, but it needs to be heard. And I would never have known that until I came on this call, really. So honestly, the best thing that we ever did was moving her. But from a personal point of view, I had a baby 6 weeks ago, and having a baby in the middle of lockdown, and you can imagine how hard it was not being able to see grandparents. And the staff at all the nursery school here, they became her family. You know, they were doing so much for her, from her coming in early, going home later. You know, she couldn't see her grandparents. I was in hospital for like a week afterwards, after I'd had my little boy. So if I didn't have the staff here, you know, putting the effort in, even like, you know, keeping her routine just absolutely normal while everything else was going crazy at home and in the world during a pandemic, it was just the nicest thing. I've already put my little boy's name down to come here. He's only 6 weeks old, but here's where he's going to come. So hopefully it's still going to be open and still going to be going, because my daughter wouldn't be where she was if it wasn't for this nursery. And everybody I tell them to come here. So.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was a really wonderful contribution, and I can see the comments happening in the chat room about how people really value hearing from parents. So we very much appreciate you coming tonight, particularly with a newborn. But it's, like I say, it's important to hear about, you know, why we do it, and I know that it's going to, lots of people listening and watching tonight are going to be grateful to hear you say publicly the reason why everybody does what they do in the maintained nursery schools. So thank you very much, that was fantastic. Now going to move to Annika. Annika is a support staff and a Unison member in a nursery, and she's going to be speaking about how they support the children that they have in their care. So thank you very much, Annika, and if you could unmute yourself, which you've done. Thank you.
Laura's just asked me to say a little bit today around how valuable early years is to making that big difference. I think Shamim and Kate covered an awful lot of what I was going to say. But for me, it's really putting forward, I can't say how crucial the early years is to making that difference. We are the first point of call for those parents. We are there at the beginning, we make those relationships. We are the first people that these parents come to trust. So we have to have those relationships when we're talking about development, when we're talking about how we can best support those families. It's not something that we go into thinking it's going to be an easy ride. We all go into this because we're passionate about making that big difference to those parents, to the children. It's about us empowering those parents every single day, about giving them the tools so they can be the best carers for those children possible. Like I just said, it's all about the early intervention that we put into place. In my area, we have really high levels of deprivation. We have worked hard to build a reputation for our nursery, so parents, like Shamim said, will come back time and time again. They will come to us for advice, they will come to us for all manner of things, as I'm sure you all know yourself. It happens every single day. And ultimately, the sad thing is, if funding continues to be cut, it's going to be those parents, it's going to be the most vulnerable in our communities that are going to suffer. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Annika, for joining us, and thank you very much to Unison for supporting this meeting, and for Annika for representing Unison as well. We very much appreciate that. We're now going to move on to hear from a teacher perspective and an NEU member's perspective. So we've got Michaela Loebner, who is a teacher at a Maintained Nursery School in Lewisham. Thank you very much for joining us, Michaela.
Thank you, and thank you to the other people who've spoken. I was going to say something a little bit different, but in light of what the minister was saying, I think I feel the same as many people who have been watching what they've been putting in the chat. I think that there's a frustration really here, because when politicians talk about fair and what's fair, I think we need to worry a bit, because does that mean they're rationing what is given out to us? Clearly what we've got has been and continues to be a very cobbled together funding formula, and that just cannot go on. It's no good thanking us for the good work we're doing. That needs to be investment, real investment, and a recognition that actually every minute that doesn't happen is every minute when the stress levels rise in all our nursery schools, when despite you know, you probably, if you were a parent, you might not know the stress levels rise, but they are. We stretch ourselves to capacity because we believe so strongly and passionately in what we do. We do that every day. We've done it throughout COVID in all different ways, in all our different settings, and we continue to do that. But one thing that can't be ignored is the fact that a cobbled together funding formula that doesn't recognise us as schools is leading to us going. And we talked about being on the precipice and on a cliff, and we're all slipping down that cliff, down that sandy cliff. We're all trying to grab onto anything that we can to hold on. We've all got huge deficits or variations on the theme of a deficit. If we lose any more of ourselves, we're only a small sector. If we lose any more of ourselves, we will be losing something that has been built over generations and generations. It's built on the shoulders of people that understood what young children need. It's built on pedagogy. It's so vital and important. We are a vital sector. We are a very small sector and a shrinking small sector. The value we bring, we shouldn't be ashamed of you know, shouting that from the, you know, as high as we possibly can. We need to say that if we are schools, we have to be funded like a school. If we have head teachers, if we have Senkos, I'm a Senko, which means, you know, I have to be a qualified teacher. I'm proud of what we do in terms of inclusion. You can't have that on a shoestring. We've had it on a shoestring, and that shoestring is now so stretched that we're in danger, you know, mixed metaphors and all that, but, you know, we're falling, and it's no good people telling us they support us unless they actually provide the funding. We are an underfunded sector that needs to be recognised. It needs to be recognised right now. And, you know, I think what we bring is not only our expertise, our understanding of how young children learn, and all the rest of the things that we do that are so vital in a very stressed and traumatized situation that we face now. We need to be able to survive, right? And more than survive. What I bring in terms of what I feel in terms of positivity is knowing that right across our schools, on the ground, and now here in this forum, is a unity, a togetherness in our teams, a togetherness in our unions, Unison, GMB, NEU, NEHT. We bring that unity and we bring it into a fight and a campaign, and clearly we need to keep doing that, because otherwise, you know, we will lose. We have absolutely everything to fight for. We need to fight for it. We need to stick together. We need to not be played off other sectors. We are schools. We need to, all I would say is we've got to keep the fight up. We've got to make ourselves even stronger. We've got to bring, you know, parents, governors, communities that we serve. And we've got to do ourselves justice, and the people that came before us, and all the families who should come after us. If we don't survive, we can't do any of that. And if the government talk about vulnerable children, then they need to put the money where the mouth is, because now is the time to fund us and invest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michaela, for that incredibly impassioned speech, and just for articulating, I think, what everybody in the sector feels about where we're at and where we need to go into the future. So thank you. And there will be a video replay available of this tomorrow, hosted on our website, and we will make sure we send a copy of it to the Minister so she can hear those really important contributions we've just had. So thank you all for your time for doing that. I'm just going to invite Jack Dromey, if that's okay, just to give us a couple of final thoughts before we end the meeting. Is that okay with you, Jack? If you can unmute yourself, please. Are you able to unmute, Jack? Yes.
There we are. Is that all right? I was slightly surprised by some of the things the Minister said. First of all, when she said that we need to be clear about the benefit of nursery schools. Anyone in the world of education knows the benefit of nursery schools. You are exceptional with an outstanding track record. There has been endless studies into the work of nursery schools. All of them have concluded that if you didn't have nursery schools, you'd have to invent them. Indeed, there is a strong argument in favour of more nursery schools, certainly not less. Secondly, on this issue of fair funding, like some of the others who spoke just now, for me that just rung a wee bit of an alarm bell, because if you look at where, as the point was made earlier, where nursery schools are based, they're based overwhelmingly in areas of high deprivation. And also, if one looks at some of the studies that have been done in terms of the allocation of public funds, then to be perfectly frank, less well-off areas suffer disproportionately compared to better well-off areas. So I certainly will be keeping a very careful eye on what is meant by fair. Thirdly, in relation to the spending review that was referred to, and for those who don't know, there's going to be major announcements made next week by the Chancellor. That's overwhelmingly, we are told, focused on the economy and the economic crisis. The spending review is not scheduled until the autumn, and we can't go on delaying, because to make the obvious point, the clock is ticking towards the summer of next year, and it wouldn't be fair to say who, but in a discussion I had with the head teacher earlier on today, the point was made to me that fixed-term staff were already starting to be notified that they would be laid off because the head teacher has got to plan the budget of the school. And if we go into September, October, and then by the time decisions are made, then that will create mounting problems. By the way, I totally agree with Paul's point that the message to local authorities is unmistakable. No local authority should pull the plug on nursery school funding whilst we're seeking to find a long-term solution. Just to make two final points. One is to repeat that key above all else, believe you me, I've been through this many times, including with many of you, is parent power. We need an army of parents once again on the march, lobbying, bringing home to their members of parliament, dare I say it, if necessary, putting the fear of God in their members of parliament. We need that mobilization once again, bringing home to MPs the passionate support that there is for our nursery schools. And the only other point I'd make is that I think there's a point well made about public campaigning as well. There's been many good initiatives. I mean, I remember when we had head teachers in Erdington dressed in teddy bear outfits going down Erdington High Street taking petitions. We've had all sorts of events in Birmingham. Nationwide, do you remember, many of you would have been on it. We had that marvellous march of 700 on Downing Street, including, forgive it, I'll mention it one final time, the Erdington Mums Choir. But you had highly imaginative contributions, banners, posters from all over the country. So there is that element of the campaign, which is not just parents, direct to MPs, but also what we do in the public arena. Because I think one of the conclusions from this meeting is we know why nursery schools matter. Not everyone knows why nursery schools matter. That story needs to be told, and to be told with passion and imagination at the next stages. All I would say, I'm the world's eternal optimist, but my very strong view is, notwithstanding the huge problems that we face, we are not talking, I'll stress this point again, about a large sum of money. It's not going to break the bank to do the necessary by our nursery schools. Is that what we've got to do is to step up the pressure over the coming weeks and months. Can we do it? I don't know who said it, but yes, we can. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much for that, Jack. It's really encouraging to hear you as a Member of Parliament being supporting us. But as we've discussed several times tonight, it's really important that all Members of Parliament, all different parties, and particularly from in the government, do understand the value of the Maintained Nursery Schools, what we provide, what the unique provision that we provide to some of the most vulnerable children. And that's one of the things we're asking people to do from tonight, is to take part, to move forward in the campaign. We have these letters that we're asking you to write to MPs. Both NEU and both NAHT have sample letters on their website. You are very welcome to visit and to use those letters, but to also add your own context from your own nursery. As Jack said earlier, stories are really important, particularly for Members of Parliament when they're listening to their constituents. So please do move forward and take part in that action. So we've come to the end of tonight. We've had 850 people with us, joining us. Thank you to all of you for your time tonight, but a particular thank you to the panellists for being with us tonight, to Jack Dromey MP, to Beatrice Merrick, to Mary Bowstead, Paul Whiteman, also Vicky Ford, Minister for Children and Families. Thank you to her for giving us her time tonight. And as I said, we will pass on a video of the meeting so she can hear the fantastic contributions. And I'm just going to give a particular thanks to Shamim, our head teacher, to Kate, our parent, to Annika, our support staff worker, and to Michaela, our teacher. It's really important that we got to hear your voices tonight, so I thank you particularly for your time. Please do tweet around this with hashtag Save Our Nurseries. That's the campaign hashtag we've been using going forward over the last few years, but also we'll be continuing to use going forward. If you're a member of a union and you need some support, both NAHT, NEU and Unison are available to support you in your unions. And if you do want to get more involved in your union to make sure that Maintained Nursery Schools have a high profile within your union, do get in touch and do be part of your trade union, be a leader in your union as well as a leader in your school and in your local authority. So as I said, we'll have a replay tomorrow. We'll email everybody who's attended with the link to the replay, and we will also be tweeting about it. So you'll be free to share that with colleagues. But this is part of the campaign. It's not the beginning and it's not the end. We absolutely have to go forward, and we absolutely have to continue to fight for our precious nursery schools, and to make the point that they are our schools, and to win those arguments with MPs. Campaigning does work. Campaigning has to work, and we have to keep going, and we will win through. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time tonight, and we look forward to working with you to secure the future of our wonderful Maintained Nursery Schools. Good night.